How's everybody doing tonight for episode 10? Wow, 10 of The Haunted Hacker. So a lot of good stuff has gone on this week. So we are actually being picked up by Tech Strong TV to be hosted on their platform. We've built out our Discord server, and we've picked up a lot of new people. I think we have like 10 new people in Discord, a couple new people to the crew. One of them is Ghost Exodus, and another one is a hacker from Uruguay that was on, both of them were on Darknet Diaries, and they have some really good stories. And next Saturday, we'll have a bunch of ex-hackers with stories together on the same podcast. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. We've already had to ban one person because of inappropriate behavior or whatever. This is for the web, and it's for everybody. So if there's something you don't agree with or something you don't like, send me an email. I may or may not look at it, but we'll take a look. So tonight we have Kevin Fielder, who is a really good friend of mine. And I'm going to unmute him so he can speak. So a little backstory on me and Kevin. I met Kevin in London, and it was at the NIST conference. And he, myself, Greg Vandergast are all speakers for Sapphire. And I think David Parkinson's online as well. And he's from Sapphire as well. So without further ado, let's get started. So I'm glad to have Kevin here. Kevin, long time.
Hey man, how's it going?
Excellent, man. Excellent. Yeah. It's great to see you.
Yeah, it's been a while since you left the UK, isn't it? So
yeah, it's been like 4 months, I think now. But I don't feel like I'm that far away anymore because I think I've had pretty much all of us on the podcast with a few exceptions, but I'm sure that'll work out. So last time I saw you, you were CISO of Just Eat, and I know that you've moved over to FNZ Group. Why don't you start by taking us through what brought you into cybersecurity and kind of your path? You're muted, Kevin.
So I've got a bit of a sore throat, and I muted myself to cough, and then I realized that you're being draconian and not allowing us to unmute ourselves. So I was like, can't even speak. I've been silenced by the man. So I was CISO for Just Eat for just over 3 years, which is pretty cool. Got to kind of join there, build a whole team, do happy to talk about everything we did, but the whole building every part of a security team and function from pretty much nothing. So that's really exciting. And now I wanted to kind of move back into finance. I know it sounds a bit dull, but security is a lot more important when there's like billions of pounds at stake, right? So it's kind of Just Eat and other kind of online store, other online stuff it's obviously important, but there's kind of names and addresses and ordering, whether it's jeans or CDs, whatever. There's not as much at stake in terms of kind of if there's a small breach, it's not, it's bad, it's serious, but it's not catastrophic. Right. And obviously FNZ, they're one of those companies that you've not really heard of, but they're quite big. So we do kind of wealth management stuff, but it's wealth management for other companies. So Standard Life, Quilters, HSBC, all of those kind of people use the FNZ platform behind the scenes. So there's several hundred billion of assets under management. So it's kind of a much bigger deal if something goes wrong, right? So it's obviously a bit more scary for me, but also security is much more kind of part of the fabric. So they've had a really strong second line team that did some of the first line stuff and a good security culture, but they want to build a kind of a fully fledged first line security team. So operational security, AppSec throughout the SDLC, infrastructure, cloud, the whole piece. So kind of similar to what I did at Just Eat, just a bit kind of with a bit more at stake effectively. So it's kind of seemed like an exciting thing, and they wanted someone who was not a super kind of, not there's anything bad with different types of CISO, but they didn't want someone who's come from a purely risk or non-technical background. They want someone who's kind of got a bit of a technical background as well, because it's a tech firm. So someone that can kind of understand the issues as well as doing the kind of risk and sort of paperwork side of things.
So at a top level view, how did you get to become a CISO? Where did you start in security, and what led you to, the position of CISO?
Yeah, so I think it's one of those jobs where there's definitely not one way, right? You'll talk to 10 different CISOs and find we've all had different routes up. And just before I dive into that, one thing I would say is it's not necessarily for everyone, in terms of, not because people can't do it, but you do have to become, as with a lot of stuff, as you get more sort of managerial, you can stay fairly technical. It's one of those careers where like I can still get my hand in and I still have to talk to pen testers and talk to developers and stuff. So I still got to be moderately technical, but I'm not going to pretend I'm hands-on anymore, not remotely. But equally, as you and many other people can attest to, you can do really well in security if you want to be financially successful as well as kind of have a career or whatever else. You can do pretty well in security as a senior pen tester, or a head of or team lead, senior manager, whatever the title is of an AppSec function or any cloud function, whatever you're passionate about. Mm-hmm. So I would just couch that in, don't necessarily think it's the place to be for everyone in security. It's if you really love the hands-on thing, or pen testing, or cutting code, whatever it is you love doing, follow that path and do something that's going to still like have a career that can like earn you a pretty good shit ton of cash if that's what you're about, and you can shape how things go and shape strategy a bit, but still keep your hands on. So don't necessarily kind of think that the pinnacle CISO, if you're someone who wants to really stay hands-on, the pinnacle could be what you do, or being the lead pen tester for an organization, or whatever your area happens to be. So I would just say that a lot of people talk about like CISO being where you want to get to, but it's only where you want to get to if you enjoy that balance of being a bit technical, but also having to talk to boards and deal with risk and deal with second and third line teams and all the other stuff you have to do. So it's not necessarily what everyone's going to be happy doing. In terms of me, so I started off doing, strangely, kind of my career was I was running a small business, a little shop in a town called Hitchin, selling kind of gym supplements and workout clothing and stuff. And I also kind of like, I had my degree was partly computing, and I've been quite into computers and tech stuff sort of most of my life, whether it's monkeying around with playing with phones, or playing games, computers, whatever else, building computers, all the sort of stuff we did as teenagers when you're a bit slightly geeky. But sort of I also like sport and gym stuff. Mm-hmm. So we're running a small shop with a friend, and then I kind of, because it was kind of a bit slow getting off the ground, and one of the things I learned is that whole go big or go home thing. So we didn't want to borrow too much money because we were scared of getting into debt. So we had this little business that was kind of ticking along and paying for itself, but not making a huge amount, because back in those days, like this was like early mid-90s, so if you weren't splashing adverts in like Muscle and Fitness and Flex and Men's Health and whatever the big magazines were, because it's kind of pre the internet being massive, you weren't doing loads of mail orders, so you were only kind of getting trade from local gym folk and a few people you knew. So you obviously had to spend thousands on the adverts. So we kind of had this thing where it's ticking over, but we hadn't had the bottle to borrow the thousands to do the big ads to get the mail order trade. So I then took a job just doing random call center stuff. I think it was for a bit of dental software of all things. So nice. Dealing with BNC networking and dentists trying to run software and stuff like that, which is fun. So kind of got into doing kind of an IT job doing that. And then after doing that for a little while, stepped away from this business, because one thing I also discovered was with a business like a shop, even if it's something you're passionate about, fundamentally it's still a shop selling stuff. Right. So it wasn't ever going to excite me enough. So I left that to my partner, and then kind of moved on doing kind of various tech jobs, kind of internal support, that kind of stuff. Worked for a little company doing spread betting and share trading, those sort of things. And then I was working for GE Capital, and I'd always kind of had a bit of a, like, I like tinkering with security. So even though I wasn't in the security team, I was the guy that, because I was in a project team that would do the building new firewall projects, or, network security projects, or what do we want to do with IDS, and playing around with Snort and stuff. So did a bunch of kind of security related projects and being as security adjacent as I could be. And then we got a virus outbreak. I can't remember what it was now, some random little virus in our office. And I managed to deal with it before Symantec had a fix out, and like just monkeying around in the registry, deleting some files, rebooting the machine. So it was, obviously wasn't that ferocious a virus, because I could deal with it by just sort of changing some registry settings and deleting some files. But I worked out how to get rid of it before the AV got updated. And it happened to coincide with us having a new security manager start, and he was building a team, and he was like, "Do you want a job?" I was like, "Yes." And that kind of got me in security, and then just did a variety of things. I've always been a bit of generalist. So kind of, again, that's probably a good thing for any kind of leadership role, but talking about CISO in terms of having quite a broad experience. So I've done kind of internal support, I've done external support, I've done security work. After I did security for a little bit, I moved into architecture, because on the basis, probably a bit like Greg talks about quite a lot, that if you do things right at the design phase, you get rid of a lot of the security issues we're dealing with every day, right? Because you just built it,
Right.
You never get rid of everything because there's always going to be time pressure and you're never going to be perfect. But that kind of, so I moved into not general architecture a bit to sort of, but with a security focus that I tried to bring to things. Then some security architecture, and then a bunch of years kind of doing things at WorldPay in various security roles, building up a little internal team doing what we're doing. So we owned everything up to kind of live. So we were the kind of pre-go live team. So across AppSec and infrastructure and everything. So it's kind of like a little mini CISO world, but just for pre-go live, but it's quite broad. And I also had some interesting things there. We talked about how we look at making security profit centers. If you're a company with a lot of, especially SME companies connecting to your systems, could you make the USP that you help them with their security, whether it's hosting stuff for them, scanning things for them, giving them, kind of code and other stuff to work with. So we were looking at how can we help make security a profit center that we actually sell to our customers as well as being kind of part of what we do. And then obviously that built up to kind of the head of title for whatever titles matter, but that seems one of the ones that comes along. And then after that, I got my CISO job at Just Eat. And yeah, it's one of those things. It's they obviously took the flyer on me. You'll find, I think, if you want to get into the kind of CISO world, you'll probably, your first job will probably be with a company that either hasn't had one before or is a bit smaller or whatever else, and will take that chance on someone who's not quite there to step up, rather than, and obviously, as we all know, once you've got a title, whatever it is, whether it's whatever job it is, if you've got the title, move into another job with the same titles, that'd be easier because you're kind of a known quantity. So it was just that stepping stone. So, I'm always going to be grateful to kind of Dave and the team at Just Eat for giving me that chance, because it's, hey, you're not a proven at this job yet. Have the reins of a pretty chewy security budget, go and build us something. So yes, I think it's that, and I guess that ties back to, so I'm rambling a little bit, but I guess that ties back to a lot of that stuff about getting people in industry as well. It's that same attitude of finding people that you think are going to be good and giving them the chance, right? You always need that. But yeah, so I've always been a kind of moderate techie at heart, and just kind of done for me, what works for me is having that broad background. If you want to lead a team that does a bit of AppSec and security culture and infrastructure and cloud and security operations and all of the other bits, if you've got a broad background, you're probably going to understand a lot of that. So when you have a conversation with your team, you're not some numpty who doesn't understand anything you're talking about. You can have a sensible conversation about most of the stuff you're doing. And I think that's quite important, just to have their respect and also help make sure you're doing the right things, right? Obviously, I always say, like a mid-level analyst probably knows more than me about what they do, and I'll always trust their opinion, but at least I can have a decent dialogue with them about it and kind of challenge what they're proposing and things.
Right. So now that it's post-pandemic, or kind of like, I guess we're still in the pandemic, because you guys are on lockdown. Like you guys are still on lockdown, like what, number 6 or 7 or?
Oh yes, it's crazy, and it's utter madness. It's like, you can have Christmas. No, you can't have Christmas. Kids are going back to school, and literally the day before they went back, or the day they went back, for some kids I think was like, oh no, you're not anymore. So yeah, it's literally it's a shambles, mate. It's terrible. But,
so
yeah,
being a CISO during the pandemic and looking at how cybercrimes increased quite a bit, what is your biggest pain point as far as cybercrime goes? Do you guys see any of that traffic? Do you see any of the traces of cybercrime against F&Z Group? And if so, what is it and how do you guys address it?
So I think, I mean, obviously I can't talk in any detail about kind of my current company, as I'm sure you expect, but just in general, and obviously from the previous role as well, there's obviously an uptick in the kind of social engineering kind of thing. So I think there's a lot of stuff in the same way as if all businesses moved online and delivery and everything else. Same thing, right? So if I can't do a bunch of the scams I do, I think the reason for the uptick is probably because an awful lot of criminals who were doing non-cyber or cyber and other stuff can only do cyber now, right? So, and you've probably seen them yourself. There's a bunch of, COVID, and now the vaccinations out. There's a bunch of vaccination-related phishing and SMS phishing and all that kind of stuff as well, right? So there's a big uptick in that kind of thing. Which I think is to be expected. I guess it's the big difference between this and other kind of events is that it's so global, right? So if I have a good phishing thing or a good social engineering thing of whatever sort about COVID, or your friends in hospital, your family's in hospital, or something's happened, blah blah blah, whatever it is, that works on a much bigger scale. Right? Any country where you might have to pay for healthcare, or where you might be worried about getting a vaccination, or where you might think you can jump the queue to get a vaccination sooner by paying, or whatever else, that's going to work globally. Whereas most things, if there's a tsunami or or some weather-related incident or a power issue or whatever else, it's quite localized. So it might be big, but it's not, you haven't got that scale of I can use this, I can scale this up to work almost everywhere. So I think that's probably one of the big things that's caused it, right? Which is that global nature of it. As far as, I think it's interesting. There's more, but a lot of it's more of the same, right? If you've been around, I guess you see WhatsApp chats with kind of like friends and family and stuff, and they're like, oh my God, I can't believe people are taking advantage of this. It's like,
right.
That's what always happens. I guess if you've been around this for a while, you're never surprised by it, because every single event that's bad, whatever it is, bank breach, anything, you see on the tail of that, all of the people taking advantage of it. But if you're not in the industry, I guess it's like, oh, I haven't seen that before. Oh my God, people take advantage of this.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's really interesting. I've replied to some kind of friends and family people the other day. It's like, I think I must be too jaded because none of this surprises me anymore.
So we deal with a pretty unique situation here in the States, not only the pandemic, but the chaos of political tension and the riots, and nobody's really sure which way the country's going to go. And I see so much data coming across, like different threats that are coming up. I see a lot of false news. And it's kind of hard to keep up with it. It's like a flood of information. And I can only imagine like being a CISO, having to sort through what's real and what's not real. But like you said, being in the industry for so long, you kind of get a handle on, what you really need to focus on. Which brings me to another point. So we've talked before about, companies who hire ex-hackers or people that probably don't have the cleanest backgrounds to be on their security team. And my opinion, I've voiced this, over and over again, is that, you want someone who knows the other side, right? You want somebody who can identify traffic, not based on signatures on IDS, but what's behind the signature and what generated that alert. But that comes with a level of trust for the employee. So how do you view bringing in people with, let's say not so white backgrounds?
For me personally, it's not something that's a challenge. Obviously, if it's, I guess the more recent the not whiteness is, the harder it is to kind of justify it in terms of the risk. And that's the hard thing, isn't it? Because you want to be able to give people a chance. If you've done, whatever it is, but now you're, I guess rehabilitated, for want of a better term, but wanting to do the right thing. As we all know, half the reason why people reoffend is because they can't get a real life after prison or after being caught in anything, because fundamentally a lot of places won't employ you. But conversely, working in finance is a bunch of regulatory things. So sometimes, no matter, I'm still getting to grips with kind of all of the rules around that myself, but sometimes you might want to do the right thing for someone or help them out, but then there's a bunch of background checks that they have to go through that are regulatory mandated. So it can be, I guess, in a non-regulated industry, it's probably a lot easier. So if you are someone who's trying to do the right thing but has a checkered background, I would suggest probably focusing on non-regulated entities as where you might want to work first, just because the CISOs or the team leads or whoever's looking to hire you will have an easier time because there's less rules about that. So even if they have some background checks, there'll be background checks the organization does that you can have a discussion with HR about. But if there's a regulatory rule that says you can't have people in with certain things, like especially, and it depends what they are, right? So if it's in finance, it's very focused on things like financial things. So if it's financial crime, or you've got CCJs against you, those kind of things, so you're more likely to be someone who could be bribed and have financial issues. That's a big red flag. If you're someone who's maybe done some, again, this is me talking my personal opinion. I'm not a legal expert on this, but if you're someone who's maybe done some of the things that you might have been involved in, or whatever else, where it's not financially motivated or financial crime related, it might be an easier sell to get someone in who's got awesome skills and is clearly trying to do the right thing to do that. And I guess there's maybe things on a company side you can do to help with that, right? So if someone's coming in as a tester to do the adversarial testing stuff, equally, in the whole kind of least privileged access control model, right, you don't need access to much stuff anyway. So you can manage that by having the tests controlled and making sure that person or anyone in those roles who doesn't need, you shouldn't have the access anyway, right? So if you use the appropriate access stuff, same as me and my team generally should have access to see most stuff, what's going on, but we shouldn't really have access to any actual systems apart from in an instant. So it's a day-to-day, someone coming in the security team, I guess I'm kind of arguing around here, but someone coming in the security team is actually a fairly low risk one, because it's not like you're, say, coming in as a financial processor who could make financial transactions on behalf of the organization. You're coming in as someone who'll have access to no systems, but maybe test the security of them or whatever.
Right.
So yeah, so I guess the short answer is yes, I think it's a really good thing. But I think, equally people, no matter best will in the world, if you've got regulatory requirements that say legally you can't hire people with certain backgrounds or with certain criminal records, there's nothing you can do as an employee of the organization to get around legal regulatory requirements.
Right. Like here, there's a lot of jobs for DoD and government positions, but I don't even bother to apply to them because I know that as far as security clearance, I probably would never get another one. But and also another frustration for a lot of people, I think, is choosing which company to go with when it comes to employment, right? So a lot of people that are new in the industry, they look for the most money and they look for, the quickest opportunity. I had an experience in Scotland with a company that offered me a CISO position, which was a disaster.
So I remember that,
Yeah. And didn't get paid for 6 months and it was just horrible. But there's companies out there that are looking to take advantage of people. So how would you suggest that people look at companies? I always tell people, when someone hits you on LinkedIn, look at their background, look at the companies, look at, do your own due diligence and OSINT on individuals. But that also goes with companies, right? Because there's a lot of companies that, may have a bad reputation. You and I both seen some of our friends go down with some really bad companies and cause a lot of issues. So what would your advice be to a newcomer coming into the industry as far as picking which company to go with?
Yeah, and it's gonna I guess it depends where you are in your career. If you're it's always going to be about that kind of, money's important. No one's going to say it's not. But fundamentally, let's say most people don't leave jobs because of money. If you're on a salary and you're doing okay, it's going to be more about kind of what's the role like, how empowered am I, those kind of things. So do that. Look, whether it's Glassdoor or whatever, but look for reviews about the company, what it's like to work for. This is where one thing about having a bit of a network. I have a bit of a love-hate thing with the whole social media stuff, because I think there's an awful lot of people out there who spend their life on social media but aren't necessarily doing any good for anyone at all. And it's pretty vacuous, right? But equally, having enough of a network on LinkedIn or wherever means you will probably know someone who works there or know someone who knows someone. So you can ask around a little bit as well to get that kind of real word of mouth about what it's like culturally, and ask those questions as part of the interview as well, right? So you can, most people, you've got to remember that a job interview is it's a two-way process. Right. It's always a two-way thing, right? So what every job is, when you're working somewhere, it's, am I getting what I need from the company? And that's going to be a bunch of things, and it'll vary from person to person. Salary, flexibility to see, look after your kids, autonomy. Some people have autonomy, some people like to be a bit more directed, but the right appropriate amount of directional autonomy for how I like to work. Praise, promotions, training, whatever. And the company's like, are you smashing it? Are you delivering? Are you a good member of the team? All those things. So it's always that two-way process. So you should feel completely comfortable to ask questions as part of the interview process. So it's often that kind of thing when you have that interview and you do the standard stuff, tell us about your career, tell us what we want. We'll ask you a bunch of questions. We might give you a test. And then there's like a 30-second bit at the end of the interview where we go, oh, do you have any questions for us? And it's like, what are the holidays like? And people always feel kind of bad to ask, but delve in, dig in. So when I'm given ask them, what's your management style? If you give me a task, how do you want me to update you? How and have that discussion. So I've recently obviously inherited a few people, and I've asked them how they like to have their interaction with the manager, right? So do they want weekly one-to-ones, bi-weekly one-to-ones, and how often do they want to chat, and how much chat do they want from me? Because obviously the one-to-one stuff is as much about, it's that kind of how you're doing as much as what you're delivering. It's more about they're more of a kind of human, how are you kind of thing. So and do those questions. So delve into that, and don't necessarily get hung up on like the company. So everyone's like, I want to work for Netflix or Google or whatever the trendy company, and they may not be great, they may not, they're probably not bad, but there's probably a lot of jobs in those companies that's pretty dull, like every company, right? And you might go to another company where I don't think you have to be passionate about your company to do an awesome job. So you can work for a company where you like, I'm not really that passionate about what we do, but I love doing a great job, so I'm going to smash it, and I'm going to, this is a really good opportunity for whatever it is, because they're building out their AppSec team, and I love AppSec, and I'm getting to not just do the application security piece and code scanning, but I'm getting to kind of shape how the team looks and help build the team and how are we going to engage with the engineers and all of that kind of stuff. So if you're really passionate about that, it may not matter what the company is. If they're building a new team and you want to build things, that could be where you want to go to. So think about what you're passionate about, but definitely don't get hung up on the company as opposed to the team and the culture. And one of the things I often talk about is, in most companies, there's a bunch of rules you've got to follow, and there's a bunch of HR processes, and there's a bunch of whatever other things. But equally, within your team, if you're a really good team leader, you can make the team culture awesome as well. So the company may have a great culture, but you can also improve that for your team. If you're a company where people work from home and people do work from different locations, fundamentally half the company doesn't know where your team is or what they're doing, right? So as long as they're delivering those, you can make their life really good and give them more flexibility than maybe normal, because your team is delivering. As long as you're seen as delivering, people will then start asking you how you're delivering so much. Why is your team so happy? Why is your team engagement so good? And that can help make change in the rest of the org. So look for the team, look for the leader of the team, and make sure they're great. Then look for the rest of the company culture, and then probably finally the company. Unless you're really passionate, like say, I don't know, I really want to work in the charity sector because I feel I want to be helping people. So you might have a real passion about working in a certain place, but if you don't, that should probably come almost last. And it's the company culture, it's the team leader, the rest of the team culture, then the company culture, then the company is probably your way going. And just take your time, and equally also don't be scared of making mistakes, right? Yeah. If you've got 7 jobs in a row and you've been in each one 3 months, that rings some alarm bells. But if you make a mistake and you're in a job for 3 or 6 months and then you move on, that's fine. No one minds that, as long as you don't keep doing it. You can make a mistake, so don't be too scared about having to find the perfect role. If you think this is probably good and you've got no alarm bells, and especially if it's your first job, whatever, take fly at it, get stuck in and do a great job, and then see where you go from there.
So we do a lot of talks about hacking and social engineering and the offensive side of security, right? Mm-hmm. So have you ever had anybody that you interviewed that had done OSINT on you, looked at your social media, dug your background, had every talking point? Have you ever felt like, or had somebody come in that had already done the OSINT on you as an individual?
A little bit, not to the point where it seems super creepy, but I've had people come in. And interesting, some salespeople use that tactic as well. So they'll come in and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, I saw your talk on this," and they'll do. So with people in industry, it's probably a good thing. With salespeople, it's often just trying to get that hook. Hey, you're amazing! I saw this. Right. It's like if you get a popular LinkedIn post, you'll get a bunch of people reply to that going, "Oh, I saw your post, but you didn't really care, did you?" But yeah. So I've had a few people come in and done that bit of prep, and it's especially with sort of the more junior roles. There's been a couple of people that come in and be like, "Yeah, I saw your talk on this, and I thought that was really good, and I like the way you spoke about your team and stuff." And they've clearly done what we've just been talking about, right? Which is do that little bit of research and understand what the team's like and how you like to manage. And I guess, if obviously it's probably a bit easier with me because I talk about it quite a lot, but if you can see the team leader or the manager or whatever, or people from that team talking about their teams, not just what they deliver, but talking about team culture in public, that's a good way to get that sort of insight as well, because they're not going to come out and say a bunch of stuff in public that's completely untrue, because the team's going to go, that's not right. So, you can't really talk about, hey, I built this awesome team, I'm really proud of them, we've got a great culture, they look out for each other, this happened and that happened. And it's going to be, it's fairly likely that it's going to be true, right? Because somebody in the team, if your team's got a terrible culture, is going to post somewhere that that's not true.
And we've both seen that, on social media, where people are unhappy with what's happened at work or what's happened with their job, and they go directly to social media. I try not to do that, but I do try to warn people as far as companies that are definitely not, on the up and up and kind of shady. But I think as far as social media goes, not a good place to voice your opinion as far as distaste for your position or issues you've had with a previous job.
Yeah, no, you've got to be a bit careful, because it's also, you've got to remember going back that two-way thing, right? Yeah. You can have a bad relationship with a company or a team. It doesn't make it a bad team. It just means it wasn't right for you. And if someone was outwardly malicious, or like you say, didn't pay you or whatever else, because it's like a relationship with another human, right? You can have an absolutely terrible relationship with someone, and then you both go off thinking, what an asshole, and then both have awesome relationships with someone else. Exactly. So so I think be fairly mindful, unless it's legitimately kind of illegal, shady, bullying, not paying, whatever of those things, in which case the warning may be worth it. And also remember that whilst it may not be fair, if you're too much of a troublemaker for other companies, your next company might be a bit like, oh, he seems really good, but they've caused loads of problems and I'm not sure I want to risk having the same issue.
Yeah. So I've seen that too, and it's really difficult to, conceive, because, when I have problems with companies, I may mention I may mention a problem, but I don't mention a company publicly. I just try to steer people away and kind of give them a warning as to what to look out for. So, New Year 2021. We're still in lockdown. Still a lot of government political issues. What
Yeah.
is your predictions for 2021 as far as cybercrime and the whole, I guess, environment of, the internet?
My God, predictions. I think if anything over the last year, I'm going to swear, but who the fuck knows? Um, sorry, but yeah, no. I think what's interesting is, and I think what's going to bring home a lot of the stuff we've been talking about for a while is the whole SolarWinds, Microsoft, FireEye, government stuff.
Mm,
Not only shows how far-reaching and how dangerous kind of supply chain compromise things can be, which is really hard to manage because your supply chain and how far do you go down the supply chain and blah blah blah. It's hard to deal with, but also we're going to start seeing those things that have been so successful
mm,
become the norm. And then there'll be so I think one of the things that I've been more sort of highlighting to the team and to my company, and I think it's worth highlighting to everyone, is you always remember, it may not be a month, it might be 6 months, but this month's nation state, once it's in the wild, is next month's script kiddie.
oh, for sure.
And I know it's a bit more complex than that because there was a lot of work went into this, but fundamentally the techniques and tools they used will now become techniques that everyone tries and techniques that everyone uses, because that's what they're learning. So, and that's now out in the wild. So all the, obviously the specific code they used, right, that's going to be spotted by every bit of anti-malware solution out there. But the techniques they used and the way they did it and those kind of things, and even the stuff like, you probably read all the reports on it, but all the clever stuff it did, like turn itself off. Oh, I'm going to look. Oh, there's all this anything, something the machine might find me. I'm just going to turn myself off. I'll check again in a while. I'll try and disable the services. I'm on a certain domain, I'll turn myself off. I'm on a certain IP range, I'll turn myself off. All of these things it did to hide itself and then recheck and stuff that were really subtle. And I think and that's where it gets really hard, right? Which is the whole. And I think people need to be seriously concerned. If you've got any indication you were breached by this stuff, just updating to the latest version of SolarWinds or whatever isn't enough, because they were so good at hiding. You need to rebuild pretty much everything they could have touched, because they wouldn't have done the same thing on the next machine. They would have used that to get in and then done something else. So I think it's a bit of a tangent, but it's another wake up call for everyone that this stuff is real and really serious. And I think it will drive a lot of conversations. I think the prediction for 2021 is probably the same as every year, right? Which is more of the same. There's going to be, we've got the pandemic, we've got political unrest in a lot of the world, and we've got people being concerned, and you've got the pandemic's leading to, especially where people are struggling, and if people, I count my blessings having a job at all at the moment, right? So there's a lot of people who are struggling because they're losing their jobs and they're struggling to find work, and all of those things, and are stuck at home. So you imagine you're stuck at home with your family, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, and you've lost your job and you've got all this pressure piling up and you can't do anything about it because you can't go out to find a new one. So there's probably, that will increase the kind of level of disenfranchised people and the level of kind of unrest and unhappiness that obviously leads to, that can lead to more unrest, and whether it's even more kind of political unrest, or people on the far right or far left getting into power when there's elections because they just shout, they speak out to those that are struggling, whatever else. So I think we can rest assured that whilst a bit of normality will return as the vaccine comes out and people can kind of go back to a bit of normality, I think there'll be still a lot of unrest and a lot of fear and stuff in the world that will lead to people being able to play up to that, whether it's social engineering, whether it's driving bad behavior. If you think you're at risk of losing your job or you're unhappy, you're probably that much more likely to be bribable or get involved in the wrong things, right? So there's probably just a general increase in all of those people related stuff, so social engineering and crime, and people in work being unhappy or potentially more tempted to do crime, whatever else. So that will probably continue to increase. Obviously there's the whole remote working stuff. I guess I've been a bit blessed that where I've been has been companies that had that in place and were pretty good at it already, but I know a lot of companies struggle with that, and there's literally there's no way people are going back to 5 days in the office if they don't have to. After proving for a year and a half you can work at home 5 days a week, there's very little argument companies can make that you can go but you have to back in office 5 days a week. So that whole remote work thing is going to continue. So I think as that continues, we have to get better and better at it. There's a during the pandemic, there's probably a little bit of, like in say way when a company has a breach and they come out really well and talk about it, people are pretty forgiving, right? Because you're doing the right thing. Equally, during the pandemic and during having to work offline, work at home, people and regulators and legal and customers and shareholders and whatever else will probably be a bit more forgiving if there's an issue related to that, because you've had to do it because of the pandemic. But if, as we start to allow more flexible work and it becomes the norm, we have to make sure we nail that down, right? And make sure we've got the right stuff in place for that to be safe. And I think the other thing I'd love to see more of is, which I don't know, I hope it happens this year or more, is security being a much more intelligent around data and behavior and things. So we have so much data on what people are doing, where they are, what they access, how they're accessing it, what device they're using, etc., etc. And that's such a rich amount of data that most organizations aren't using yet to go, okay, you're on the same device at the same location, working in normal hours. We can be quite relaxed about you because it's not accessing the same things, and it's then I don't know, but 2 or 3 in the morning you're accessing stuff. A bit strange, but we know you've got a kid, so you probably just got woken up by your kid and can't sleep, and you're doing normal things. So you're just doing your normal work, pretty low risk. 2 or 3 in the morning, you're accessing a bunch of stuff you never accessed before. That's a red light, right? So using that intelligence to be much more clever about how we protect things and make data safe everywhere and those kind of things. So I think, so for me, it's just more of the same, but very with a big focus on kind of social and people and those kind of stuff. And silly breaches, like when it gets back to summer here in the North Hemisphere or summer in the Southern Hemisphere now, people just being on a call and talking about sensitive stuff in their garden and those kind of silly little things where someone might overhear something. So I think it's that behavioral piece again that we have to kind of keep an eye on.
Yeah, I think you mentioned monitoring and data and like normal behavior versus something abnormal, and I think that we're fighting that in the U.S. as far as privacy goes, but on a government level, because there is access to a lot of that data, and a lot of things could be probably subdued by looking at that data. But there's a fine line between monitoring the data and actions and behaviors and basically breaching privacy. I did a talk with BCS Hertfordshire last week, and that was one of the topics was, so you're working from home in a mixed environment, you have kids, teenagers, whatever. So not only do you have the security of your own system, your own corporate system that you have at home, but then you have to take in consideration all the devices that are attached to that same network, play a huge part in keeping your network safe. Just last week, there was a VPN issue, vulnerability that came out. So, I mean, as we work from home longer through the pandemic, there's going to be more and more exploits driven towards VPN, towards, all kinds of security around working from home. And a lot of people, when I talk to them, I say, what is your company doing as far as helping you secure that environment? And it's a tough question because they don't want to overreach into someone's private life, but that private life has a lot to do with the security of your own company, the data that's being transferred from a corporate laptop through a VPN or whatever. And even cell phones, you're no longer in the office, you're no longer plugging directly into the Ethernet or protected Wi-Fi. You're pretty much at the hands of your employee, right?
Yeah, to an extent, but I think if you're, I hate the term, but I'll use it, but the whole zero trust thing, right? So you can do pretty well, I think, without, if you treat the network and everything else around your device as untrusted, then you can kind of, I think, do a really good job of, if we're pretty, say your company, and you can be fairly strict about you're on a company device or you're VPNing into a Citrix session or a VDI or whatever. But if you're on a company device and we've got appropriate controls on that device, so we're comfortable that device is secure, reasonably secure, we don't need to know that much about the rest of your home network because we're not trusting it. So you have strong monitoring on my work device, which I think is completely fair and appropriate because you're using it for work. And when you don't want us to monitor, you just close the lid and done, right? And we're only monitoring your access to work systems. And if you want to do a bit of browsing on it, that's fine, but probably be mindful that your work knows what you're browsing. Right. That's what you're. It's a work device. If imagine, I don't know, if you go back to pre-computers, you're in a factory working on a factory thing, you wouldn't start thinking, oh, I'm building a car, but I can repurpose this set of tooling to make myself a necklace, would you? That wouldn't even cross your mind. So why do we think the work tool laptop is something I can then do anything I fancy on? It's a work tool. And most work's pretty chilled about what you do, but you just you have to understand that if I'm on, they probably can't necessarily see all the encrypted traffic, or mostly, especially with banking sites and that. So I think most companies, even where they do decrypt the web traffic, are sensible about it. So if you're accessing HSBC or your bank of choice, we won't decrypt that because we know we trust that to be a banking site, and you're not going to exfiltrate much data to your bank. So there's, companies will take that risk-based approach, and where your privacy is concerned, they probably won't decrypt all the traffic, and you can probably ask your teams about that. But I think a company has every right to be fairly strong on the monitoring and controls on a work device. And if you've got that in place and you know what's happening with data, and you're understanding, okay, the data is coming out of it, but it's got a secure connection to us, and it's only connected to and from us, and they can't copy data to other places on the network or to USB or whatever else, I think you can get to a place that's pretty strong without needing to know anything more about their environment, because their stuff can't access your device, your device isn't accessing their stuff. And if they try to, you'll be monitoring that and logging it, whatever else. And then the next level up from that, which still doesn't require any access to their device, is the whole VDI option. So you might do for your super sensitive stuff, so where people are making huge financial transfers, or where admins are managing systems, you might have like a management network, say VDI onto that. And then at that point, the only thing in their home is a screen. So unless, apart from filming the screen and photoing the screen, which is always going to be a risk if you're not in the office, and even in the office for most offices, because we can all have phones and you can wear Google Glass or whatever. So most offices aren't strict about phones. Some are, but most aren't, right? So if you then go to that level where you're doing a VDI type solution for admin and sensitive stuff, literally the only thing in your home is a screen. Right. No data ever gets to your home. So at that point, you're like, well, fine, you can do this anywhere as long as you're not letting someone watch the screen. And especially if you're doing it from a work device, so we can be fairly sure that there's no malware on a device doing screen capture. Then I think so I think you can do it really pretty strongly without needing the intrusive level that you were kind of alluding to. Yeah. So I think it's like you were saying, it's that balance, isn't it? You want really strong monitoring on your work data and work devices without intruding the rest of my home life.
Exactly.
I actually think the bigger risk is things like this, phones, because the phone controls, MDM, blah, 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 is nowhere near as good as my laptop. So I can put tools on a laptop that lock it down, and data monitoring tools and stuff that will know exactly what you're doing with data. And they work at rootkit kind of level, don't they? So they understand move, copy, delete. They don't understand Word or other stuff. So you can't circumvent them by copying stuff from one file to another, because it just follows it as a copy process.
Right.
So you can do really strong monitoring data on a device, but these I don't think we're as good at.
And I don't think we are. So that brings me to a good point. So after we get done with questions for you, I'm actually going to do a demo for exploiting Android phones and getting access to.
We've just triggered every MDM provider that's going to see this. Like, right. We are as good. We're amazing, and they are good, but I just don't think it's as good. And it may not just be the solutions. It may be the companies, but most people I've spoken to in most companies, a lot of the controls they talk about are laptop-y controls, not phone controls. So I think there is some risk around phones and mobile devices where we're not as strong. Most organizations aren't as strong as they are with laptops and desktop type stuff. Yeah, I'm actually going to run a malicious APK that has been encrypted and signed, so it looks like it's legit, and the phone allows it and does its update, and then it opens up the phone to me, the microphone, the camera, the GPS location, all the above. But we'll do that later. So does anybody have any questions for Kevin? If you do, put it in the chat and we'll discuss it. So how are you dealing, Kevin, with doing speaking engagements? I know it's been difficult for me because we've had to rely on remote sessions, and the speaking engagements are still coming, but I mean, it's all remote. And it's not the same to me. I like being in there with the people. Yeah, I like the interaction. Although, I think, part of me is quite liked it because I can be super lazy and just do stuff from home. But I think because I'm not doing as much, and I've been a bit kind of near. The weirdest one was when I had to record something for, and that's so weird. So you sit in your office or your room and you spend 25 minutes talking at your laptop and then just send them an MP4 file or whatever. And that's I much prefer a discussion like this or like a panel where there's interaction. I'm not a big fan of even talks, right? Because you stand there in front of an audience and talk for 15, 20, 30 minutes and maybe a bit of questions at the end. and you can sort of tell if they're engaged, but especially if it's a bigger one where there's lights and stuff, you can't really see anyone.
Yeah, exactly.
So you've got no real idea whether people are sitting there going like, nah, or like, oh, this is really good, and there's no feedback. And I'd much rather completely change what I'm talking about because someone in the audience starts asking questions. So I'd much prefer interaction.
Yeah.
Almost to the point where I'm a bigger fan of panels and discussions over talks.
Yeah. So I remember one that you and I did together at Barclays, the Barclay high rise in downtown London. And literally we sat there for a couple of minutes, I think, until Eliza actually raised her hand and asked a question. But
that was, yeah, I asked a question. That was so weird. Yes, yeah, so the risk of audience interaction is when I'm like, hey, what do you all think about this, or what should we do about that? And literally, yeah, the audience sat there and it's like, guys, you're all here in your own time to talk about security, and none of you wants to talk or ask questions. So yeah, that was weird. Yeah, Eliza saved us on that one.
Yeah, for real. But then we've had like talks like the conference at NISC, which I thought was really cool. It was a stage environment, but it wasn't like overwhelming. Like there was a lot of interaction, and I think that's where I met you, and I met Greg. I had actually met Greg way before that on the internet, but just didn't know who he was like in person.
Yeah, I think I'm the best. Those kind of the sort of 150 to 300 people size conferences. It's a really good size to have like enough people there, but it's still quite personable. Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah, I did one recently last year in Egypt, and I did it remote, and it was really quite odd, right? So they took the laptop out to the podium and turned it around. Yeah, it was crazy, man. It's crazy.
It's like some sort of like 80s movie, isn't it, with some sort of like strange robot walking around with your face on.
Yeah,
so I can't remember Just Eat. I can't remember what it's called. There's a little robot thing that was basically a remote control stand with wheels and an iPad type thing. So if you weren't in the office, you could call into this thing and have your face talking to your team.
So I watched a conference with Snowden, and he had the same thing where he had called in. They had taken that same type of robot with the screen. So I think the more we get stuck in this pandemic and stuck at home, I think more of that technology is going to come out, because it was odd and it was really strange, but it was kind of cool because I didn't have to actually be there. But they put the laptop on the podium and I could see everybody and they could see me on the screen, and I felt like I was there. But it was just a weird feeling. Like I felt like I was being taken over by some mechanical device. It was just really odd. But the more I do it, the more I get used to it. And so it's a lot of fun. So Paul has a question. What is a skill you wish you had, but you don't yet have?
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I kind of veer between technical skills I don't need. So I'm currently plowing through a Python book. So I still like to play with technical stuff that's totally irrelevant to like what I do, but I like to keep my hand in and learn still. Probably when someone like I'm quite comfortable chatting in front of people, but sometimes someone walks into the board or whatever and they're just like, hey, how's it going? And they just got this, whatever it is, this thing, and people are like, oh my God, I trust you. Yeah, if I getting better at that kind of owning the room with people, where I guess it's because I'm still pretty I'm only on my second CISO gig, so I'm still pretty junior in terms of chatting to boards and stuff, so having a little bit more of that kind of owning the room rather than feeling like I'm kind of a guest there. I don't know what I don't know, sorry Paul, I don't know what you call that, but whatever it is where you kind of I not just know I'm good, but I project knowing I'm good. That thing, so you get a bit more confidence. Thanks, man. But yeah, so that's something I'd like more of, or be better at. And I think it's easier something like this. It's because I'm pretty confident generally, but it's much easier when if you're there to talk to people, or they've asked you to come and talk to them. It's awesome when you're going in front of the board, especially if you've got a slightly adversarial third line team or something, and it's going to be a bit of a kind of, they're giving you a bit of a kicking for something that hasn't happened. It's hard to be like, but and it's hard to not sound, when you're like, but we've done all this awesome work. Look at all this great stuff we've done. It's really hard to project that without coming across a bit defensive. Do you know what I mean? When someone says, hey, you cocked this up, and you're like, but we did all this. It's how it's getting that across as, hey, we actually did an awesome job. You trust us, and having that just be a little bit better at that. I think I'd like to be better at, or do more of.
I think that's a really difficult skill to obtain too, because I find myself walking into a room and not wanting to be in a room. But I think that comes along with, so Stu Hurst talked about imposter syndrome.
Yeah, it was his topic for a year or two. I think he's done some other stuff now, but yeah, he talks about that a lot for a while.
Yeah, I think that plays a big part. So your own self-confidence and kind of it has a lot to do with personality. So salespeople are really good at projecting and coming into a room and taking over a room. But I think the more technical people, that's a skill that we really have to like hone and sharpen. It's not something that we're kind of innately born with.
And the weird thing is, salespeople are often the people who know the least. Not knocking them, but they're not necessarily. You can walk in and it's like that thing where you can stand in front of an audience, and if they don't know you're wrong, you can be wrong and talk like you're right, and they won't. A lot of people, if you come across trustworthy, they'll still believe you. It's that kind of that ability, but without being a liar, actually doing it with the real stuff, right?
Yeah. So another one, Mohammed says, are you seeing organizations realizing they need endpoint security now that more people are working from home? So like EDR and stuff like that.
Yeah, 100%. I'm a huge fan of endpoint controls. I think it's one of those things where we keep going around in circles, right? If you've been around the industry for a while, it's like, everything was mainframes, then everything was desktops, then everything was VDI, then everything. But so it's kind of, you go in these little cycles. Everything gets outsourced, everything gets insourced, everything gets outsourced, blah blah blah. So yeah, but I think endpoint controls are super critical. Right? If you want to know what's happening with your data, how do you know that? So it's, you've got a lot of these things and they're easy to put in, right? So you put in the web gateway that does some email and DLP and whatever else, right? And it's great for stuff that goes through it. But once it gets to my machine, you haven't got a clue what's going on. So your network endpoint to start, the network gateway has its place, but a lot of people say that, hey, here's your DLP solution. It's like, yeah, but it's not, mate, is it? Because I'm at home and you don't know what's on my laptop.
Right.
So I think you do need, I think for me, a super big fan of endpoint stuff. I think it's more and more critical. I think you have to find that balance because no one wants 75 agents. So it's how you do the right thing. So like you mentioned, it's probably, like some sort of pretty advanced EDR thing that does your AV and your firewall control and your telemetry and stuff, and some sort of DLP thing, and then maybe a patching or kind of management agent for the sort of normal ops teams and that. But yeah, you definitely need an EDR type thing, and it's got to be much more than traditional AV because they're just pants. Some sort of data management. I hate the term DLP, but yeah, something that data management, data movement controls around what's happening with data, and that's again got to be. I think we need to move away from relying on classification or relying on regex, because classification no one does well everywhere.
No.
Regex will find, like, if it's a credit card number, it'll find it, but you just put it in 4 different files and your stuff, right? And if you say to a regex DLP based solution, give me all the PII, you're just going to get so much stuff. Companies have entire teams, so you have to get more intelligent. I think that's another area we should get better at is DLP. How do you make DLP something that I don't need a DLP team to manage? It's got to be much more intelligent ways of looking at it. Like, oh, that's corporate data. You're trying to move it to a non-corporate location, some stuff like that, but also without being too onerous. So you can go too far the other way with it and say, right, you can't ever copy anything corporate to the web, which then means I want to copy my bio to a speaker's bio page. Mate, you can't copy that. So DLP, I think that's somewhere where we need to level up. So if you're anyone out there who does DLP, give me some proper machine learning, clever DLP that will manage my data without me needing a whole team of people and a billion false positives. So absolutely. But endpoint controls are super important.
So I was looking at SolarWinds and the whole compromise, and they went after FireEye. I know why they went after FireEye, but I think that we're going to see a lot in the future, like APTs going after companies like CrowdStrike, right, who have endpoint protection and their agents on every system. Why would you go after FireEye other than intelligence and some of their clients? But if you really want to do mass damage to a number of systems, go after those CrowdStrikes, go after those McAfees that are endpoint protection. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that in the future. I
think the whole, as we've seen, you often have to read between the lines of these stories. I don't think the people doing this cared at all about getting some of the FireEye tools right, because they were mostly open source and available anyway. So that was a total red herring. It's all using FireEye to look at the Mandiant stuff where they've done investigations for governments and things, right? It wasn't FireEye at all. It was the Mandiant side of things I think they're after.
Yeah, it was funny because during the riots in DC, they broke into the news feed and quickly said the Department of Justice admitted that their email server had been hacked during SolarWinds, and 3% of the DOJ and FBI emails were leaked. So, I mean, those types of attacks are pretty prevalent as far as like, APTs going after, government and, Department of Energy and stuff like that. But I think like, maybe some lone wolf hackers and maybe some hackers for hire will actually go after endpoint. I see that being the future. But, companies really need to look at how they deploy their employees at home, working from home, and what exactly they're using to protect that endpoint. Because, during my talk with BCS, I said, you have cell phones in the same room as this corporate laptop. You may have like, some of these home audio devices like, Alexa or whatever, which I have one sitting right behind me that I'm about to do testing on. But that mixed behavior and listening to, those devices, listening to what's going on in the room, stuff like that. There was an exploit where they were able to grab the voice recordings from the Alexa devices and actually play them back. So you're on, corporate calls, boardroom calls, whatever, from home, and you have all these devices. Something's listening, or something well is listening.
Yeah. I kind of generally advise people turn stuff off. So you turn it, because most of them, I've got a bunch of the Google stuff laying around the house, and but I generally, when I'm on work calls and stuff, they've got, the good thing is it's quite nice, they've all got physical switches, so it's like a physical microphone off switch on them all. So you can whenever you're in the room talking. It's the same as like not letting your neighbors listen, right? It's just making sure that you have that little bit of, like kind of operational awareness. But yeah, I think because it's fundamentally they're a good thing. Google doesn't give a fuck what I talk about. Like, in the kitchen, it's going to hear me and Mira talking about what dinner we're going to have and other random stuff, and dealing, what to do for the house and what we'll call the dog if we get a dog. Whatever random conversation, there's nothing of any value that can cause any harm, right? And it's so the risk versus the reward of being able to just like listen to music everywhere and shout it when I want to know stuff and whatever else is for me, it's a good fair trade-off, but equally turn it off whenever you don't want it to listen.
So another question, with the recent events in the US.
I think you missed one.
Oh, I did?
Manan, just a couple above that, about getting into, do you have any tips for experienced people from non-IT backgrounds looking to get in the cybersecurity industry mid-career? It's pitifully rated to hack the process where recruiters, or just ignore recruiters, right, for a start. I guess for me, there's it show, I'll jump in, Mike, if you don't mind, and then
go ahead.
Yeah, so I think for me, it's same as almost with the junior stuff. It's show willing. So if you want to get into cyber, don't just come to me saying, "Hey, I want to work in cyber," and I'm like, "Well, what have you read? What are you interested in?" So do some stuff to get into that. Stuff like you're doing the right thing, man, and obviously kind of listening to these talks. And Mike's going to shares a lot of expertise. But so listen to talks, go to conferences, which is easier than ever now because they're all virtual, right? So go to some virtual conferences. Read some books or blogs, even if it's just the obvious stuff like Schneier and those Troy Hunt and those kind of stuff, right? So just read some of the blogs and dark reading, and they're kind of just the news sites to find out a bit about what's going on. So when you come and talk to me, you've got some stuff. I'm like, hey, what is it you're interested in? Well, you're like, well, I heard this really interesting talk, and I think I'm interested in the people side of stuff because I love like cultural things, or I'd love to learn more about how applications work so I can kind of test them, because in my current career I've got a bit of a reputation for breaking processes and improving them. So you've probably done stuff that relates to what you want to be doing, even if it's not security. And I guess I think it's probably be realistic in terms of if you're fairly mid-successful in your career, while cyber's a fairly good salaried environment, you might have to go to a slightly more junior role if it's your first role, right? You can't necessarily go, hey, I'm a senior manager at this, therefore I should be a senior at this. So you might have to be realistic about where you're going to go and move up, like any kind of career change. But yeah, for me, it's showing willing, being engaged, and maybe, and it depends what you want to do. If you know what you want to do, so say you love people stuff, well, you probably want to go to a culture or an awareness type role, or if you love breaking stuff, maybe a pen testing role, or if you come from an operational background and you love being on the coal face and dealing with issues, maybe a security operations role. So you can kind of maybe have an idea. If you don't have an idea, I would say SecOps is probably the best place to start, because you see a bit of everything. You can get stuck in this stuff, you can understand how stuff works, you're going to deal with incidents, you're going to talk to the pen testers and all the other people in your team, because you're the kind of, the SecOps is like the hub that everyone has to work with, because anytime they need more expertise, you talk to the cloud security team or the AppSec team or whatever. So for me, SecOps is always the go-to if you haven't got a clear direction, start there, and then work out what you love doing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So when I started out, there wasn't pen testing when I started hacking and doing stuff like that. The generation I came up in, we actually kind of were like the I guess the frontiersmen, like creating that path. So the way that I came up, it was basically I stuck with what I felt comfortable with and what I knew. And but the problem was that there wasn't a lot of jobs for that. So I got in where I could, and that was in defense. As far as like monitoring and looking at alerts and seeing those different types of attacks, gave me some insight as to where I wanted to go from there. I wanted to be the one that created the attacks and actually carried them out. So I went a different path, which takes me to the next question. Lucas, we did cover people trying to gain access to employees' properties and being targeted to try and gain access. That's going to be a new focus. It's obviously a target.
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. I think.
Yeah,
because if I can get, and it's if you're laptop, especially where you've got people who have admin from home and stuff, it's that if you're known as a high valued target, I guess it comes out of social thing, right? It's the balance of social media. You want to have, I've gone down the route of being super open on LinkedIn because it is what it is, but fundamentally that does mean I have some more risk because people know what I do and who I work for. But yeah, if you're known as, you're all over the place, but hey, I'm super admin for this bank or whatever, and I can do all this stuff. There's a small but realistic chance that someone's going to come in your house and make you do stuff on your computer. It's not something we like to think of, but it could happen. So absolutely. And I think that's where the whole, obviously it doesn't help with the individual safety, but it could do. But the whole behavioural and all those kind of things. So if Jane the admin suddenly starts doing loads of odd stuff, we're like, oh, that's unusual. Jane's trying to steal data. Jane, but she's really good and she's really trustworthy. She could be, so that's where having, again, that intelligence from a logical perspective could protect you physically. Because that's really unusual. Let's make sure she's okay. Anyway, then you either phone her up or get the police there. It's like, it depends how sure you are something's going on. And again, it depends what you have. If you have corporate management, you might even be able to put on their webcam as part of your remote desktop management and see that they've got someone criminal there, and then tell the police there's definitely someone there. So the logical side of things and the intelligence we can gather could actually help protect someone in that circumstance where they can't tell you something's wrong, but they're suddenly doing stuff they shouldn't be.
Yeah. So I'm going to put on a tinfoil hat for a second. Do you think that the push for, quarantine and lockdown and putting people in companies separately and in homes with those same type of devices like cameras and microphones and VoIP phones, do you think that is a way to, do you think the government uses that as a tool to monitor what's going on? Because I know in the US, they definitely did with XKeyscore, with some of those other projects and programs. But also the CIA had leaked a tool called Weeping Angel, where they would take USBs and physically insert them into smart TVs and take control of the TV and, listen to conversations and watch the video on the camera. Do you think that governments may access those work devices at home and that's another way to kind of get a hook?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that question is probably broader, right? Because it's your work device may be, depending on your company, may or may not be the most secure device in the house. So they can access your work device or your personal. Either way, they're in your house, right? But yeah, there's a whole load of conspiracy stuff on this, isn't there? Right? It's I was listening to something earlier, and it was kind of, if you wanted to make America weak, you're any country, but they're Americans talking, and it's like you sent everyone home. You're not letting them train. You're trying to take the guns away. And then there's all these rumors about China giving the soldiers extra stuff to make them stronger and better and whatever else. And it's there's a whole, that you go down this whole rabbit hole. What I thought was really interesting there on the conspiracy front was the whole storming of Capitol Hill, right? So your country's entire government is in this building. We won't put many guards around it at a time of political turmoil. I'm like, that even though I'm not a conspiracy theorist, that rang a bunch of alarm bells. How on earth did a relatively small, compared to some kind of things, number of people manage to storm the government's house in a country where you have a ginormous army and lots of guns?
And it's funny you say that, because they had called up the National Guard 3 days before and put them on alert. And then there's another video where when the crowds were coming to the Capitol, police were opening barriers, waving people in, like, come on, come on. And it's sad that the U.S. has got to that point, but with all the things that have gone on with the election and all the things that have gone on with SolarWinds and just a multiple kind of like a triad of effects against, our infrastructure. I think we're just seeing the very beginning of it. And I think that a lot of things that used to be conspiracy are kind of showing themselves as to be like practical operations that are actually going on.
Yeah.
The more information that gets leaked. And we had a bombing here in Nashville a couple hours away that knocked out our internet completely. Like, I haven't had Wi-Fi other than my phone. We're actually doing this on a hotspot on my phone since Christmas Day. And it's a nightmare. But another thing, that goes back to the whole conspiracy theory, right? Guy blows himself up because he's afraid of 5G. I mean, come on. They've already proven over and over again that 5G doesn't affect the body the way everybody says it does. But the turmoil and the tension, pandemic, political issues, the economy, I think are all like a perfect storm to really play havoc on operations of companies and connections across the world with the internet. And I think it's going to get worse from here. So does anybody else have any questions for Kevin?
In there. There's what advice would you give yourself 10 years ago?
Oh, that's a nightmare.
That's a super hard one, right? It's probably to dick around less, to be honest. So, although that was probably 20 years ago. But yeah, so I've kind of got where I'll be roughly where I want to be generally, nice, fairly good. Probably non-career advice is don't have a kid with a woman you're not going to stay with. Because I love my little girl, but my ex-partner's a bit of a nightmare. Just in terms of having to, she's fine, she's a good mum and everything, but it's just I have to fight constantly to see my daughter. So so that's probably advice but I don't know how you do that, because you never know how these things are going to work out. Career-wise, I don't know, it's really hard, because part of me is like would have been like knuckle down. So I spent my 20s, I'm a relatively clever dude, I'm lucky, and so I spent my 20s coasting pretty hard. I did all right in my career, but I could probably have got to where I am 5 years earlier if I'd been like, focused, I want to do this and blah, blah, blah. But then equally, I had a lot of fun, and it gave me a whole variety of roles, which probably helps me be good at what I do, because I've got such a broad background. So it's a super hard one, because you never know, give someone a bit of advice and they go down this rabbit hole and end up miserable or end up amazing. And I'm reading this really interesting, just literally started a really interesting book. I think it's called Dark Matter. I'll share it with you. It's a fiction book. Me and my partner got me a book subscription where every month I get sent a random book based on I gave them some likes and ideas, but I've read some loads of interesting books. And this guy, I'm like only about 50 pages in, but basically he was a super hardcore scientist that was going to win Nobel Prize stuff, but then he met his wife and had a kid and is super happy, so kind of ended up still being really good but kind of lecturing. And then he went to a bar to congratulate his old colleague who had won all these prizes, stuff he would have done, and he was totally cool with it. But then as he was leaving the bar, someone kidnapped him and did something weird to him, and then he woke up in this room and he's now the guy, he had to run away and run home from this place where all these people were trying to do tests on him, and he's found out he's still the same person, but he's in this super cool house and everything's pristine and perfect, and he's got these awards for this crazy science he's done, everything and all of this stuff. So he's got everything he thought he would have wanted, but he hasn't got the kid and the life. And I think I'm guessing, so I've not read the rest of it, I think it's going to end up with kind of exploring which do you want. And I've thought about that myself. You see these people who are like super amazing at something, but how much do you have to give up to be super amazing at it? So would I want to be the best at something in the world but not have the love of my life and not have my amazing daughter and friends and whatever that you get from not having that, and being able to do sports? So I do a lot of physical sports stuff as well. If I didn't have time for all of that, but I would be the grand master at something. So I think it's a really, really hard one. So so bit of waffle, but fundamentally probably just keep doing what I was doing, and maybe knuckle down a little bit harder so I'd got here a bit quicker. But my advice to everyone is do a lot of stuff. Right. And same for my daughter. I did a little soppy Instagram post about it the other day, but the best thing we can do for our kids and for ourselves is get them to try a lot of stuff. So when your kids, and same for you, go, right, I really want to be shit hot at pen testing, or I want to be a CISO, or I want to be whatever, it's because you've done a bunch of stuff and you know this is the best thing, this is what you love, as opposed to this is all I've ever done, so I'd probably better carry on doing it. So yeah, I'm trying to get, so my little girl, we've done, I got her a workbench as well as a kitchen, and a little plastic workbench, and we'll do loads of drawing and cuddling and baking, but also I got her trying to pick up, see how heavy, you've got these slam balls that you pick up and throw on the floor. So seeing how heavy a slam ball she could pick up the other day. So she does some physical stuff, and she's really cool because she's like, I can't do it, Daddy, I can't do it. And she's like, if I can't do it now, I'll come back later. And then she did it, and it was amazing before. So yeah, try lots of things, and that way you'll have a really broad experience. There's a cool book called Range, about this, which is basically people with range will be much more successful in this world than people who focus too much in the long run.
Yeah,
sorry, I tend to waffle a bit, but yeah,
I completely agree with that. So I've done like a ton of things like boxing and traveling and hacking. All of those play like a part in your entire being and the way you look at your current job, because you have vast, like multiple life experiences, right? If I was to give myself advice 10 years ago, one would be, don't be such a jackass.
Yeah, that's my advice to me 20 years ago.
2, don't piss off the government. And 3, stay true to what you believe. I think that if I would have stayed the course, my career is actually, a lot of people ask me how long I've been in the industry and when did my career start. My real career didn't start until, God, probably 10 years ago, maybe. And I spent a lot of time in my early 20s just traveling and experiencing different places and different life. Lived in the Northwest, lived in Holland, all over the place. But I think that all plays a part into how I look at people, how I understand the world, and really just like taking a look at myself. I think that a lot of people in their 20s and younger don't do a lot of inflection. They don't do a lot of introspect to like take a minute out of their day and like just kind of think about where they're heading and what they're doing. If I would have done that, I guess about 15, 20 years ago, I may not be in the same position I'm in now. But, I don't regret any of it. I've learned a lot, and I've been able to help a ton of people. But yeah, like there are some things out there, and I'm sure everybody on this podcast can attest to, there are things that they wish they hadn't been a part of. I know for a fact a couple of people. Go ahead.
I guess that point, though, isn't it? If you now make a part of your career is talking about what you did and helping people get on the straight and narrow. So if you'd never done that, you might not be helping as many people because you wouldn't have the experience to help kids and stuff get on the straight and narrow, right? So while you say you shouldn't do that, maybe you should have done to make you the Mike you are today, right?
Yeah, I would have liked to hold on to my passport though.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe piss governments off a little bit, but not too much.
Right. So that's about it, man.
There's one last question you've missed, I think.
Where?
Traditional versus cloud versus hybrid.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
You can take that one.
I think that's the right answer, right? So I think you can secure cloud, you can secure hybrid, you can secure both. If you're in a bit of both. A lot of companies, I think most companies, even if they're not all in or a bit, everyone's using something cloud, whether it's a bit of SaaS, whether it's a bit of Office 365, whatever. So pretty much every company's using some cloud stuff. And it's always about doing it right. There's different paradigms. I think one of the worst things you can do though is when you are in that halfway house on migrating to cloud, is do in the cloud what you did on-prem, because it's different.
Yeah.
The security principle the same, like no way you do it, protect your data, patch your shit, but fundamentally the tools available to monitor and protect a cloud solution, especially looking at infrastructure at AWS, Google, are very different to what you do in your data centers. And don't try and do the same thing. Try and make sure you make the best of both. Is the only thing I would say.
Yeah, and I would be careful with using Office 365 because the SolarWinds attack also focused on Office 365. So with that, if you guys have any more questions for Kevin, you have my email address, and I can definitely get those over to him. I'm gonna try this demo. This is the first time we've done a live demo without like me recording a video and actually doing it beforehand. So I'm hoping it doesn't completely fail. But what we're gonna do is I'm gonna show you guys how I exploit Android phones This kind of goes back to the whole working from home and that environment. So give me just a second, Kevin, if anybody has any more questions, give me.
Yeah, man, I'm around. Ping me anytime.
Yeah. Give me about 2 minutes and I will start the web share so you guys can see the screen share so you guys can see what I'm doing. All right. So, sharing. So actually right now we're gonna, I've actually stopped the recording so you guys can do whatever you want to. And I'm going to stop that share and share something else. Let's see. All right, can everybody see that screen? Yes, no, maybe. Okay, good. So I've already set up Metasploit. I've already created my APKs. And we're going to, yeah, there we go. I'm going to set up a listener. If I can get over to the other one, there we go. So what I've done, you'll see that I've created an APK. The one that I've created is Cyberpunk 2077, popular game. People are looking for mobile versions, I'm sure. And the way that I run this exploit, if I was to do it maliciously, right, which we won't talk about that because that's in my past. But I would advertise this, or I'd build it into a website, or really push this out to open forums, Reddit, whatever. And I would host this on something like AWS or a machine that I've taken control of remotely. And so with my cell phone, I'm actually going to grab that APK and execute it right now. So you can see the effects and what happens once you do that. And I've actually ran this APK through an encryption device to kind of hide it and sign because the big thing is you don't have to sign the APK to make it look legit. So it's got a certificate. The cell phone obviously didn't stop the exploit or the APK. So at this point, I'm in the cell phone with this interpreter session. And so let's take a look at what we can do. So all of these, all the commands that are listed as far as, what you can do with a cell phone, screenshot, screen share. You can go actually into the file system. You can dump logs, you can dump SMS messages, phone calls, whatnot. So right now I'm going to try this with this window with a share. I can't promise it's going to work because it's video. But I'm going to stream the camera from the phone, which is not looking, there we go. It's very slow because I'm on a Wi-Fi that is a hotspot, but you can see what it can do. Given a better connection, whatnot, you could actually take a look at what was going on. So I'll stop that, hopefully. There we go. All right, so another thing you can do is geolocate. So with this function, you can set the geolocate to poll however many seconds or minutes or hours you want. So this comes in handy maybe if you exploit somebody's phone and you want to take a look at where they're going and kind of map it out, right? I'm going to do this and it's going to give away my location. But at this point, everybody knows where I'm at anyways. So when you do the geolocate, it'll actually give you the lat and long. And if you have a Google API key, you can actually map that out. So imagine you run that, you pull it for every 30 seconds or whatever, and you can map out the direction and exactly where they're at. So let's do, I don't know, let's do dump SMS. Let's look at some of the messages that are on that phone. So it saved it. And let's go take a look at those SMSs. This is one of my favorite exploits, and it's one of my favorite tools to use as far as breaking into stuff. So let's take a look. So there you go. So incoming, of course, if this is an old phone, I have something from the NHS. I'm sure they're not too happy with me. And AT&T talking about COVID and all that good stuff. So let's go back to interpreter. Let's take a look at some other stuff that we have. You have the dump SMS, you have the call log. Let's take a look at the call log. So we have the call log, copy and paste, and take a look at the details. Hopefully I didn't call anybody important. So yeah, it looks like I called myself the haunted. So there's tons of stuff that you can do with this, right? And I'm not going to tell you how to actually take this APK and put it through some encryption and add certificates. It's a little complex, but on top of that, I really don't want to be responsible for a bunch of people from this podcast going out and exploiting people's phones and it coming back to me. But you can also take screenshots. You can take, you can listen to their microphone for X amount of seconds or however long you want to. You can play an audio file to that phone, which I thought was really cool, which, if you think about it, you spread this exploit over a number of phones and you can broadcast a WAV file to all your targets, which can be kind of haunting, if you will. But so I ran this before and actually did a, kind of a test and to see who would actually download the APK. I put it in a forum and it wasn't a malicious APK, but it was just an APK to see how many people had actually hit on it. And we set up a machine and hosted it and it was insane. Like every 5 seconds I was getting a hit. And, think about that as far as targets that are being exploited. And you could possibly own, an entire, well, a good majority of a service provider network and their phones just based on one APK that gets put on a website and people download. You can also monitor their screen with like screen shares and stuff like that. The file system is very interesting. So once you get into the file system, you can go into their photos. You can go into, and there's actually a thing here for the contact list, which I thought was really cool. But you don't necessarily have to use an interpreter to do this. I would suggest that you guys take a look at different tools that you can use, different ways you can wrap the APK. So the big thing about the APK, so let's say you want to host this in like the Google Play Store. Google Play Store looks for legitimacy of the file, right? They'll take a look at the file, look and see if it's signed by the programmer or the producer of the file, and look at that certificate, make sure it's legit. So there's several different tools out there that you can do this with and make it look legitimate and really cause a lot of damage. So in pen testing, we don't normally use these types of devices unless, they're asking for, a complete pen test with, we want to use, we want to test people's cell phones, company phones, whatnot, see if they actually are vulnerable. And I can tell you that every Android device that I've tried this on has not stopped it. And it's because of the way that I've wrapped the APK and had it signed with an encryption key, and the key store is legit. So it's completely effective. The only thing you have to be careful for is once they grab the APK, making it persistent, right? So let's say they lose their internet connection or they shut down their phone. You want to build this into the Android operating system as something that's persistent. And I won't go into that because again, it's probably a little bit too much information. But persistence is key. Complete access is key. You can actually upload files to the phone, whether it be malware, ransomware, whatever. You can upload it to the phone. You can force the phone to accept other APKs, other malicious APKs. So you kind of get an idea there. I know we tried to go over this a couple of weeks ago, and because of different reasons, it wasn't working. But now you get the gist of what I was talking about then. If you guys have any questions about how to operate this, or build the APK, how I built the APK, and what I use to wrap it with, I can probably give you a little bit of limited information if you ask. But I'm not going to go into that here because it's probably above most people's heads. So with that, do you guys have any questions as far as the Android hacking and stuff like that? And I'm going to go ahead and unmute, ask everybody to unmute, and give you guys rights to do your video. So feel free. Anybody? There's Patrick. What's up, Patrick?
Yo.
So we have a lot of people here. I want to thank Kevin too for showing up and being part of the podcast. He and I go way back, and I'm proud to call him a friend. So questions, what MSF module are you using? So Colin, the module's really easy. It is the Android. You can see, let me just Control C this. Within Metasploit, huh? Go ahead.
It just said the host would like me to unmute, so I'm muted.
Oh. Let's see. So the module that I'm using within Metasploit, so I'm not actually using a module, I'm using a handler, a multi-handler for the Android. And so with that, you set the Android and the payload, which is the interpreter payload for the Android device. And then you set your local host, you set your port, and then you just run it. And it basically acts like a netcat listener, and it listens on the port. I would suggest not using port 444, which is the default. Maybe hide it in 443 or 8080 or web traffic. That's probably the most effective and the least picked up on. Have you tried to run it on an Android device with any kind of malware protection software on it? So yeah, so I have with the one in the UK and didn't have a problem with it, because when something is coming over and it's signed, a lot of the malware antivirus applications for cell phones, which are very few and far between, look at that and say, oh, well, it's signed, it's encrypted, there's not much I can see. Any type of antivirus has a problem with looking past the encryption. And so that's kind of a protection level. Who else? I'm sure, Patrick, you've used Meterpreter for Android devices and done APKs, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. You want to share some information about it?
Yeah, so I pack them up pretty good. So I mean, I got experience in Java programming and stuff like that. So, I mean, my advice for trying to block something like that is not only on the certificate level, but watch port traffic, obviously. Most kids are like you said, they're going to use 8080 and 444, something simple. Most of them are, just out there trying to see if they can get somebody,
Yeah, exactly.
I'm a little more sophisticated. I use port numbers that are unrecognizable. And definitely, you got to understand SSH tunneling, VPS, so there's a lot more to it than, just hosting it on your cloud VM.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I mentioned like AWS and external servers, because there's a lot of different ways that you can host that file. and get away with it. I mean, it's really simple, but you have to look at the whole anatomy of the attack, right? You have to look at the way that APK responds, the way that the Play Store or whoever looks at that APK when you execute it on a phone. And the payload is really important as well. But if you can wrap it with some level of encryption and be successful at it, and like you said, like the Java signature and certificate is like really important. And that's kind of, that's where I went with it as far as like wrapping it and deploying it. Was I used a lot of that. So anybody else have any questions? Was thinking more 0-day type protections. I don't know, to be honest with you, I don't know any type of 0-day protection or antivirus or anti-malware for Androids, because when you talk about 0-day protection, you're talking about protection for something that's not known. That's very difficult to even begin to fathom, because if it's a 0-day, there's nothing that's going to stop it until it's identified, analyzed, and put into some sort of engine. So yeah, I wouldn't use 0-day in that. I would use more complex or complicated attacks, something that detects that. So what else? And this is your guys' time. Like, you can open up your mics and ask questions, and it doesn't necessarily have to be about the exploit or even how I did this, but we can talk about whatever you guys feel is important. You just want to shoot the shit or whatever. What I do want to talk about and kind of promote is next week, me, Patrick, I don't see Ghost Exit. He was here earlier. Ghost Exodus and Alberto are going to all get together and have a joint podcast talking about our lives with different groups. We all come from some very complex backgrounds. A couple of us have just recently gotten out of federal, oversight. So yeah, it's going to be really cool. And all of us have been in different groups, which kind of cross paths and kind of mixed and splintered. And yeah, it's going to be really cool. I'm looking forward to it.
I agree. Such a mixture of, I mean, I don't know. It's so weird when I meet people and then you find out, that background of them, and you're like, oh yeah, I knew you. I seen you in a chat room one time or something.
Yeah.
It's just amazing, like over the years, it's been interesting, man. So happy to be a part of the community.
For sure. Yeah. Like, I remember when you got sent to me and I was kind of like, why do I need to talk to this guy? And then I figured it out, right. And it was kind of like a jaw dropper. And then all of a sudden, here comes Ghost Exodus, and I'm like, yeah, I kind of remember that too. And it just spreads, right? So I think we're all kind of getting over that past situation and kind of catching up. And like, the term "birds of a feather flock together" is an absolutely true term, because I think people like us with our mindsets, doesn't matter how much time or how much distance has occurred, we always seem to find each other on the internet somehow. And it's weird.
That's true.
Yeah, it's wicked.
I agree.
Yeah. So we can't unmute ourselves. It's still disabled. Let's take a look.
I have a question, Mike. It's Vicky.
Hey, Vicky.
But I'm not putting my camera on because I'm like really tired and look like
That's fine. That's fine.
I look like shit too.
You look fine. But I don't know, you guys talked about, I missed the beginning, so before your friend was on, but did you all talk about what happened at the Capitol? And
just briefly, we didn't go into too much detail about it, but I'll give you my take on it, like a 10,000 foot view. I think that looking at the data, looking at the talk and the chatter on the dark web, looking at analyst comments, kind of observing from afar the whole situation, It was really interesting to see how the current president directed everybody to the Capitol that was at that rally,
And then took off.
and watched it from a tent as the Capitol Police opened the barriers and was waving people in. And then it got out of hand and things happened. It seems to me like there were two sides of it, but they were working together. And I don't think we'll probably ever know the truth about what happened, but I think the whole thing was staged. And, to think that Pence would go against the president and the president not know is kind of, I don't know, that doesn't ring true to me. And looking at some of the analyst comments and some of the chatter on the dark web, I think that, there's more to come. Don't get me wrong, but I think we're looking at a new type of government and maybe a new environment with more outside influence. When I say outside influence, I'm talking about, maybe some, not interference, but some influence with red countries. I think that's kind of where we're headed, especially with Biden.
Because I was thinking that maybe part of the people that were going in there were definitely foreign operatives. And
well, they've identified quite a few people that were in there that had been part of other movements like Black Lives Matters, like Antifa. They tried to identify one guy and say he was communist, but it was actually, the tattoo on his hand was actually a gaming tattoo of some sort, which was really off. There was a couple people that were politicians' sons or judges' sons. Like I said, we'll never know the truth about what really happened unless an email server gets popped and we see that communication back and forth, which, I could assume that there's probably some groups that we may or may not have been associated with. They're probably looking at that right now.
thanks.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? You guys can unmute yourself.
Mike, I just wanted to go back to the exploit you tried running, and you were referring to packing the APK before. I've done some basic Android applications. What did you mean by packing? I didn't really understand that.
So when you create the APK, you have to put the payload in, right? That the APK has to have some sort of, transportation back to where you're at. So you have to embed that payload into that APK. Now, when I say pack, so there's several different applications like command line that you can use to create APKs that have malicious payloads, right? So Fat Rat, I know Patrick probably knows what Fat Rat is.
Right.
Yeah, and Shell Empire, stuff like that. Those tools are used to create like different APKs or EXEs or zips or whatever that have malicious payloads inside. And you can choose whatever payload you want. Like I use this because it gives me more control over the phone. But I could have set something up that made the phone call back on like a SSH tunnel or whatever. You can make it as complex as you want depending on what the operation is and what you want to achieve. But more importantly, so not only packing the APK, but actually doing the signing of the certificate and making it look legit. That's the most important part. So I would say look at how to sign APKs with Java. Look into learning about key stores and how those work, and maybe create a couple and test them on your own devices at home. Depending on how much you practice and what you learn about the architecture, the Android architecture, and the way that it verifies different packages, you'll have to play around with it and find out what works the best for you. But each person is different. Each hacker has their own routine. They have their own their own set of tools that they like to use that they're comfortable with, and just go from there and do a lot of research. And learn about Keytool. If you learn about Keytool, you'll learn a lot about what I do. Anybody else?
Hi, Mike. How you doing?
Good. How are you, Mike?
Oh, not too bad. Another exciting lockdown time again. Yeah, it's more about the exploit. I'm afraid I'm completely green with this sort of stuff. I'm assuming that exploits like that you've placed on the phone, obviously, probably invisible to the user of the phone, and the like. And I would assume as well that accessible from anywhere.
Yeah, anywhere. Like, so when you build the payload, you're going to hard code the IP address for that payload, and the port that the receiving end is going to listen to. So the way that we used that type of communication or that type of exploitation previously was we would compromise a machine overseas, or look at a shell server that we pay time on, or maybe like a AWS platform, and build the listener onto that platform or that shell device, and hard code the APK to call back to the IP address. And at any one time, I could have 50 sessions going at once with different phones or different devices. So does that answer your question?
Yes, it answers the question. Like I said, it's not something that I'm very knowledgeable about. My question is probably very basic in mannerism and things. But like everything else, it's something I probably have to read up a bit more about, I think.
Yeah, I mean, so the way that I look at hacking, right? So we have people who are like uber great at like web hacking, web app, that's their thing. And then we have other people who are great at like creating malware. And then we have people who, focus on creating botnets. That's just my specialty. Is I want to intercept communications. And so looking at cell phones, there's so much data on cell phones because people live their lives on cell phones now.
Oh,
and
yeah, definitely.
The knowledge and the information you can steal from a cell phone, it's like a treasure trove. So I really focused on that. I wanted to see the best way to get into those phones. I wanted to try different avenues and different attacks and see what I could do to be stopped and what got past those defenses. And over a matter of time, it became really easy. And you got to think about it too. So like the government does the same thing. They'll access cell phones and cell phone records and all the above. Some warrant less, but really it's the same methodology, and they probably use some of the same tools because they're effective. And pick your poison. Figure out where you're strongest at when it comes to exploitation, if that's your thing, and focus on it until you get it mastered. It may take a year, it may take 2 years, who knows? But mine is voice communications, communication intercept, and data exfiltration. So, and I know, Patrick, yours is what? Yours is a lot of application hacking and web stuff, right?
I mean, if I had to classify myself as something, I would say like a system hacker. As about as rounded as you get. Only because I have an IT background, so I spent most of my career in IT while being a hacker, so living the double life more or less. Couldn't wait to get off work, so I developed probably over the last 15 years different sets of skills. I've concentrated in each area, a little bit. Some things like you do, that I've never gotten into, like signal intelligence and stuff like that. So I never really touched too far into that area, but I'm pretty good with Wi-Fi hacking and radio technology as it is. But there's some things that I'd like to improve in myself. But and that's with being a computer hacker over 15 years.
Right.
So a lot of people ask, like, where did you get started? And I'm like, I just got started. Find something, that interests you, by playing is doing, because, I think one essential skill computer hackers have is I have the ability to just, if I'm after you when I was a computer hacker, I would spend a year, literally a year of my life, every chance I get, I would be pecking at your website, looking for a way in. And as soon as it was vulnerable, I was getting them. It's pretty much how hackers really think, and at an IT level, I applied obviously what I was doing in my fuck off time to my job, and it made me an effective IT manager, so it's been pretty interesting coming up in the community,
I think most of us had kind of a double life. We had that 9-to-5 job, and we'd go home and, maybe sometimes play around at work, looking at the infrastructure at work. I know that when I became a director of security, I would, test the network myself and just play with new tools and see how our network reacted to it. But all that was sanctioned. But when I was doing illegal stuff, I was actually taking data and exfiltrating it and finding ways to hide database structures and stuff like that. But really, it's all about jumping in and just putting your hands on it. I mean, the internet has all the information you need. It's just a matter of having that motivation and the patience and the time to sit down and really teach yourself a skill. And people ask me, how'd you learn what you do? And that's the toughest question anybody can ask me. Like, I hate that question at conferences and when I'm doing talks, because I don't know how to answer that. I mean, it's an ability. It's like we were kind of like born with that ability, like that ability to think that way. And I can't teach that to anybody. It's not something I can say, okay, this is what I do to look at a system. My mind, I think, works a different way than most people's. And I think probably Patrick's
outside the box thinkers, because whereas most people who were like, for example, software developers, and they've never done anything in computer hacking, right? They write code and they can write more code and shit than I ever would imagine I can do, right?
Right.
But when it comes to like actual physical hacking, system hacking, they're lost. I could tear apart their code in 10 minutes where it took them 2 years to write.
Right.
It's because I'm not looking to rebuild their code. I'm just looking to screw it up. and once I do, how do I, use that to my advantage, with whatever I'm doing. So.
Yeah, it takes a level of creativity too. I think a creative mind is something that we all share.
Right.
Because just
why not?
Exactly.
Try it. Why not?
Exactly. I think I was asked a question about lockpicking last night, and they said, how do you do that? And my answer was, I just close my eyes and feel my way around. Like it's about envisioning what's going on the other end. And I think that pertains to network hacking and web app hacking and stuff like that, is you really have to envision it in your head as to what's going on while you're doing the operation. So it's really, you have to have that creative ability.
And for example, like, a lot of what we've done, in like hacking and hacktivism, this structure around a lot of like cyber war, there's a lot of stuff that went on in the community. People don't realize, 5 or more can gather for whatever reason, for whatever purpose, and make a bad day for somebody.
Right.
So there's always that, threat for whatever reason. So learning those tactics, learning how hackers think is very important on cybersecurity.
Yeah, and especially
you don't know how. Yeah.
Yeah, in the community too. I see, like, back in the day, I saw new people come into the community and they didn't know anything. They were complete, for lack of better terms, they were noobs, right? So they come in the community and they start asking questions. Can you teach me how to do this? Can you teach me how to do that? And back then, that was looked down upon. Like, we wouldn't help those people, because the trade craft that we had, it was like our trade craft, is our secrets, right?
No GitHub.
yeah, there was no GitHub. You had to learn it by yourself. And so when people ask me, can you teach me to be like you? And it's like, how do I do that? Like, I don't think I'm capable of cloning myself. I don't think I could take somebody and give them what I have completely. Because I didn't have that. I wouldn't know how to teach the way that I learned other than just being curious and having that, I wouldn't say malicious mindset, but that dark streak that sometimes I dance the line, and back then I would go over the line to see where it would take me.
Right. Yeah, our generation was a little bit different.
Yeah.
You know, I tried to do that, you know, especially like in hacktivism, you know, like I've been a computer hacker a long time, but when I got into hacktivism,
Different story.
Yeah, one thing that I always enjoyed though is through the community, I would always, you know, get these kids now 5-6 years later that knew me back in the day, you know, like, oh, you inspired me, and you know, to see them doing good and then they're on the right side of cybersecurity, and they got their OSCP or something like that, and they just went complete the right direction because, you know, they seen it as a different mindset. You know, I always told them, like, you know, you don't have to steal people's money to be a good computer hacker. You never had, like, you know, and I respected the guys from like Shadow Crew and like all those old groups and stuff like that. I've been around the community a long time, but I think that, you know, you really don't have to really commit some severe computer crimes to like be an actual, you know, elite hacker, somebody that's respected in the community. You know,
Right.
You can do your thing and easily, you know, gain respect.
And I think that's kind of like the backbone of the Haunted Crew, is that a lot of us come from that background. We've committed, you know, some serious cyber crimes, but the way that we look at it now is, you know, the world's a different place. We're different people, and we're going to make a difference the way that we know how.
Right.
And that's sharing information, you know, kind of doing some tutorials to teach people, you know, a little bit of what we know, and just being a sounding board for, you know, people coming into the industry, and kind of give people the idea of, you know, this is a route that this person took. Like Kevin took this route, Greg took this route, and give you like a wide variety of successful people that we know and the different ways that they got there. And you can take that and kind of look at your own life, your own skills, and figure out where you want to be and how to get there. Because back then we didn't have that. There was no such thing as, you know, internet security when I first got in. That was something that we kind of like trailblazed.
Hacking was like more of like a rebellions, remember? Like it was like our counterculture. Like we just did it to, you know, we fucking smacked somebody up and laughed about it. And, like, cool, you know, and we would read like the Frack or, you know, stuff like that back in the day. But
and the Hacker Manifesto and all that stuff.
Right, and that's about as far as we got. We never really had like I remember when there was some set of scripts. What was it called, Wax or something, and then that was like a precursor to like Backtrack. And I remember when that came out, you know, and it was probably 2006, 7, something like that. But I remember jumping on it. I'm like, sweet, you know, I'm like, I have to write my own shit. Like, it was just convenient to have like all that set of tools, you know, one spot, and you know, not have to scavenge.
As time has gone by, though, we've seen that type of, I guess, tool set or whatever evolve into platforms for pen testers, and a lot of the stuff is automated. And what I found is that people will learn those tools and not really know what's going on behind the scenes, like not know how that tool really works and the exploits behind it. So when people come to me and say, hey, you know, do you know how to use Rapid7, Nexpose or whatever, you know, teach me how to do that. I'm like, no, I'm not going to teach you how to use a platform. You need to go out, look at the code, figure out how that exploit works, because, you know, you start firing exploits at random stuff, you don't really know what's going on, you can cause a lot of damage.
Yeah, that's true.
And people, and they're not educating themselves on what really happens, and
no Hail Mary.
Don't do that. A lot of people don't learn the methodology and the mindset and how to approach a network or a system. And they're told, you know, just plug this in and you know, hit this button. And the whole AI thing and the whole automation, I think, does the whole industry a really bad disservice, because the more automation that gets involved with pen testing, the less the humans involved. And really, it's the human mind creativity that makes a pen test successful. It's not the tool. It's the knowledge of the tool and the creativity to use that tool in various like complex situations. Johnny says, isn't it curiosity and passion that drives one forward? What is focused on is individual. Some dig deep, others are content with less, e.g. your explanation with tools versus detail. Yeah, I mean, so the whole, I guess, definition behind what is a hacker, I think in the manifesto, the hacker manifesto, they mentioned something about hacking is not, a physical crime or malicious crime. It's a crime of curiosity, which it is. So a lot of us have been caught up in, let's say, a cyber crime that was strictly spurred off of being curious. And a lot of us, our natural, background or the way we are as a person is curious. I've been curious since I was a kid, digging into. So I'll tell you a little story about curiosity that got me into a lot of trouble. That has nothing to do with hacking or computers, but shows that curiosity, right? So when I was a toddler, my grandmother had a tear gas gun in her closet. And I was always told to stay out of the closets. Well, you tell me to stay out of the closet, I'm going to plunder. I'm going to take my opportunity. I'm an opportunist. I'm going to wait until that closet's open. I'm getting in it. So I found this tear gas gun. I think I was like 3 maybe. And I pick up this tear gas gun and I shoot myself in the face with it. Because obviously I didn't know what it was, but I knew you had to press something. And nearly blinded me. And so that same curiosity never stopped. You would think that when, a kid puts his hand on a stove and says, oh, that's hot, he's not going to walk up to something else that looks just like it and do the same. But I always wanted to test everything around me, whether it be a radio, a TV, a VCR, a laptop. I remember destroying my mom's first laptop that she brought home with a virus I had written. So it's all about curiosity. And I don't try to stifle people's curiosity. I just try to get them to contain it. And when I talk to kids, I tell them that once you do have that ability to do the things that we do, it's like a superhero. And they can equate to that because they look up to that type of stuff and they're interested in it. And I tell them, with great power comes great responsibility. So you really have to contain yourself and learn how to, put yourself in check. And that's something that I didn't learn probably when I should. Yeah.
There's some things that definitely have to be said, and it's something that I've been trying to speak out against. It's like I've been a computer hacker a long time, IT professional and everything. I've never seen people slam in hospitals, and you know what I mean. Like, you ever see that, Mike? I've never seen that in my life, because no matter how skilled a computer hacker is, if he has that type of mindset and thinks like in degree that I think we all think, like, he's not going to do nothing like that and put people's lives in jeopardy for a buck.
No.
That's definitely where it's more nation state, because being under orders and under morals are two different things.
Right.
They don't equate. You're being told what to do. Whereas a normal computer hacker like me, it's like, I'm not going to nail some hospital with ransomware. Like, what's the matter with you? Like it's just incredible what's going on. I never thought I'd see the day,
Yeah, I'm the same way. Like, I don't see why someone would attack like a retirement center or, insurance companies, other than to make a buck. But that's not who we are.
But is that not just criminal intent? The ones that are just after the money?
Well, I mean, it's not just criminal intent, right? So a lot of organized crime that, especially right now during the pandemic, a lot of those organized crime groups that operate on the streets had to move to another way to make money because they're not allowed on the streets. So they went to the cyber realm. So a lot of these people you see running ransomware or running phishing schemes, those are your organized crime groups that are trying to capitalize on a bad situation.
Carters have, you have a whole systematic level of steps, so you got the hackers, we hack into the database, you got mules, you got cash cows. You know, there's several different you know, entities involved with it now. It isn't just somebody, you know, hacking and dumping some cards and making some money off of it like they did back in the day. It's really thoroughly organized. Nation states pretty much primarily take part in it. For example, like North Korea, you know that as well, Mike. Like, I mean, that's probably like a good portion of their budget. Is cybercrime, right?
Yeah. And like China, like when sanctions get put on countries, all of a sudden you see like cryptocurrency, you know, getting spread around, because that's the only way that they can not be traced financially, you know. So the things that you see like on TV and the cases that are exposed publicly, there's a reason for it, and a lot of it is making a example out of people. But you rarely hear about, you know, hackers stepping in to help. But it does happen. It happens quite a bit. You know, a hacker helping law enforcement identify, you know, a person of interest. That does happen a lot. But, you know, we're always looked at as, you know, the evil people or the boogeyman.
I've seen people, what was it, the Steubenville? You know what I mean? It's a prime example of somebody, you know, getting information that the cops didn't even have themselves, and he goes to jail longer than the people that committed that crime. I was like, that blew my mind. I remember that. I was like, wow.
Well, and look at some of the stuff that we did with Anonymous, you know, like taking down ISIS profiles, putting together whole case files of thousands of pedophiles and handing them over to law enforcement. But they were considering that a crime. You know, we were being looked at as like hindering investigations. And I'm like, no, we didn't hinder anything. We finished your investigation. Like the data's here. You don't even have to worry about investigation.
Back in the day, the feds told me all I needed to know, like what Aaron Swartz and stuff like that. Like I was just like, wow, you know, like 30 years for that. Like, you know, I'm like, it's really hard to rationalize. I would say that the United Kingdom, other European countries, they have a little bit better policy driven laws governing like cyber crimes, especially if it's around hacktivism or something like that. Because you know, I like to think of that as, you know, like we always explain through the documentaries, like, you know, it's no bit different than me getting 40 of my friends and preventing you from getting on the bus.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, you know, we're just trying to, you know, get our message across and move along, you know.
Yeah. And I talked to the first big crowd that I talked to in Europe. One of the questions was, you know, as far as DDoS, you know, do you think that is illegal? And I'm like, you know what? If you look back to the 60s and 70s, right, and they had the protests of Vietnam, and people would have sit-ins, and it would sit in front of doors to buildings and keep people from accessing those buildings. You don't see them getting like 20, 25 years in prison for that. You see them probably going for 24 hours maybe. So, I mean, the cyber laws are very immature. I think it's going to take a lot to actually bring those to the forefront and change them.
That's a good point. Like there should be, you know, different statutes that govern, you know, financial crimes, hacktivism, you know, and cyber stalking, and there's other issues out there, you know, that I've seen that got brought to my attention, probably near the end of my little hacktivism reign, but you know, like some cyber crimes that, you know, I never really thought took place until, you know, you meet people that have those experiences, and you're kind of like, shit, you know, like, you know, what I knew and my type of people would never do something like that, but other people learn the shit I know to do that, and it just, you know, so I feel like it taints what computer hackers really are, you know, which are people who, in a nutshell, love technology. It's really what it is.
Yeah, and curiosity and stuff. Okay, so next weekend, we'll continue this conversation with me, Patrick, and with Ghost Exodus, and with Alberto, hopefully. So same time next weekend. We have a store now, the Teespring store with all the Haunted Hacker merchandise. We have that. We have the Discord server. We also have a Twitter account with all that information on it. So everybody's welcome on the Discord. But the same rules apply as a podcast. You know, if you start, you know, causing trouble, whatever, you get hit with the ban hammer, and we won't let you back. So be kind and courteous, and not talk a bunch of noise. So this podcast is like really grown quite a bit. Like, I'm really surprised, and you know, I'm excited about the future of where this is going. And like I said, TechStrong TV has offered to host this podcast on their platform and help promote it, which will give us a lot more exposure. But I really like where it's going. I really appreciate everybody tuning in every weekend. I see multiple people tuning in every weekend, which I think is really cool. It's dedication to learn more about the industry. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and end the podcast. And if you guys want to move over to the Discord, feel free to. I myself am going to grab something to eat and call it a night. So I will see you guys later. Thanks, Patrick.
Thank
Yeah, no
you.
problem.
Thanks a lot,
Later,
Patrick.
guys.
Thanks, guys.
Talk to you later next week. Bye.
Thanks.